Yo, what's up, Dre? Happy Tuesday.
What's going on, man? I'm glad to be back warm again, brother. Can't
Oh
complain.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I can't say the same. I'll be out here kind of chilly for a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's trade-offs to it. It's trade-offs to it. I've been on the road the last couple weeks, so I'm just glad to be back home in general, man. Just to
Hmm.
have my bed, shit, just to be able to sit on the couch, man. Nothing is good like home.
Yeah,
The
no,
comfort,
there's
the
no.
comfort of your own home, man.
Yeah, that's facts. That's facts. That's facts. And you were in Chicago and Michigan, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was in. Yep, I was primarily in Detroit the last week and a half. Probably, I don't even know how many days, but about a week and a half. And then also shot down to Chicago for a couple of days. Had to take care of some business stuff. Then went back to Detroit and spent the rest of my time there. Just visiting family. All my family's there. So got a chance to link up with you and some other friends as well. So yeah, it was felt like a pretty productive trip. And went by really fast, man. Which it always does, but
Yeah, never enough time back home. And then we tapped in at New Lab. New Lab. I mean, it sounds funny because it literally is a new lab in Detroit. But
it sounds like a
uh,
cliche name though,
yeah,
I don't know, like just some shit just to call it that. But it really is some cool stuff happening there though.
it's a lot of cool stuff. It's a lot of cool stuff. Our friend Dollar, always invites us there, and we get a lot of work done. It's huge. It's huge. Right on the outskirts of downtown, and it's a co-working space. Lots of different companies in there. You have to apply to get in. So I don't think everybody can get in either. It's not like you can just pay and get in. But then I've seen like some autonomous companies there. I saw an autonomous drone company. Saw an autonomous heating and AC system for buildings. I mean, people are working on some crazy stuff. It's not just like, hey, look at my like website or look at my app. People are actually building in there. That's good energy to be around.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think this building is owned by the Ford family or by the Ford company because they own the train station, the
Yeah.
old famous train station right next door, and they've modified that and changed that into a crazy place as well. But yeah, New Lab, it seemed to have a high focus on like mobility and autonomous companies because that similar to
Yeah.
what you saw. It's always like some crazy autonomous something there. Like I saw a company that was working on, and I actually saw it deploy at the Detroit airport autonomous wheelchair
Wow.
devices.
Jeez.
So basically, if anybody's ever been to an airport or a bus terminal, basically any public space, you see people who are pushing people around in wheelchairs throughout the airport, right, to get them on and off the plane, get them to their gate or
Right.
whatever it may be. So basically, this company's been working on these autonomous wheelchairs that can do that without having to have somebody behind it pushing it. But you just see all type of just crazy stuff being worked on at New Lab. So it's good to see that level of innovation come back to Detroit because right before the recording, you and I were just catching up about how amazing it is to see the growth of Detroit over the past decade. And I think if you and I were to go back 10 years ago and there was something like New Lab, I don't know if we would have ever left Detroit.
Right.
Like, why?
Yeah.
Why? Like, we would have been
Yeah.
like, no, this is the
No
center of
reason.
innovation.
Yeah.
But that wasn't there. And so I'm glad that it's there now. And so hopefully more people who are like us who are in Detroit can stay and keep building there because it seemed like some cool stuff is coming out of there.
It's very interesting. I have to I have to wonder, do you think maybe I didn't see the vision? Like I worked for Ford, I worked in Dearborn. I worked for Ford Motor Company. I was 20 years old when I got that job. It was a big deal. I was working on the mobility team. And it's funny you mentioned that New Lab is focused on mobility and autonomy. And I remember one of my managers, we actually had the same name. He fired me though. He fired me, but it was justified. He fired me because this was to the audience. Yeah, it was about 10 years ago. Dre and I were planning on to go to California, and I had set up a job with Gigster, or like a gig. I had like a job with Gigster, and so I posted it on my LinkedIn. So he was older, so I thought he was on LinkedIn. Like we were connected on LinkedIn, but he had like no profile picture, so I didn't think he like really was on there.
Yeah, yeah.
I put in my 2 weeks, and I thought he'd be happy for me, whatever. But he wasn't happy. He fired me that same day. But what's crazy though is I remember him telling me, when I first joined that job, and he was talking about this vision, for the Ford Mobility team and all this stuff like that. And he was saying like, yeah, in 5 years, you climb up. You'll slowly climb up to a level. It was like L1 or L2. It was like these levels at Ford, and I was like, I cannot wait. I cannot wait that long. Like 5 years to be in his position. I can't wait that long. So it makes me wonder. Maybe it's just the speed that Ford moves at, and maybe it just took a while to unfold.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's that Midwest energy where we are very resilient and persistent and deliberate, but sometimes can be a little bit slow to action.
Right?
A little bit. Whereas on the West Coast is not that level of assessment, right? There's not a lot of analysis paralysis. There's just a lot of move fast and break things to sort of say, right? Like that's literally just the mentality there. And so you're constantly seeing stuff being tried and failing, working, seeding constantly. That's just the culture there. That's not the culture necessarily in the Midwest. At least as it is in Detroit. And again, I got a chance to go down to Chicago. I got the same sense there. Like it was stuff happening there.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? But it's still that old
You're right.
industrial mentality. There's a lot of money though. There's a crap ton of money being made in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars being made there. But it's slow money. It's just compounded
Yeah.
money. And they don't
Yeah.
see no
Yeah.
reason to
Yeah.
necessarily go fast or
Yeah.
make a bunch of risky tech investments.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily see where things are going. But hey, maybe that's a safe way to be. I mean, to put it to draw the parallel, I don't know if you saw it. I saw this chart circulating on X and it showed all the hyperscale companies. So AWS, it showed Microsoft, all the major companies. I think Oracle might have been in it as well. All the major companies, and it showed their CapEx being spent over the next, I think 12 to 18 months. And then it showed Apple. And Apple was way at the bottom relative to the capex they're spending on revenue and everything, and everybody else was above, right? And so I don't know. Sometimes there is, and so I say that to say sometimes there is good outcomes to be had to those who are slower to the party. So maybe there is some magic to why the Midwest moves so slow. Maybe there is.
I think there's like everything in life is pros and cons. They're not losing money as much. They might be
Right.
losing money from a standpoint of like missing out on an opportunity, but if they make the correct bet, they pretty much don't lose out as much. And when it comes to California, there's winners and losers, and those things can constantly cycle. Some people shoot up, and other people shoot down, and it's constantly like this exchange, and people are throwing money around, bags around, new things are being made, people are failing. It is, there's pros and cons, but one thing for sure is that there's been a steady upswing. But before we continue, what's up, Brylan? How you doing?
Doing well, man. I can't complain, man. Feeling a little under the weather, but we'll make it
Yeah,
through it. Very important conversation we need to have today.
absolutely. Well, you know what? We're actually happy to see you because we might as well just hop into it. We might as well just hop into it, because this is going to be a shorter podcast. Look, so the last podcast, I believe you went on. I don't remember, but
No, I was
I
off.
talked a little bit. I talked a little bit about Claude, and yes, that's what it was. I feel like it wasn't fair. I said a lot about Claude. You weren't there. You weren't there to defend them. I did not anticipate Claude to continue to disappoint me. So, feel free. I'll go ahead and give you the floor first because, Claude made some interesting moves. Some people think that they're principled. Some people think it was a mistake. Yeah, I have an opinion, but I'll wait until you guys go ahead and share your views.
Yeah. So I'm sure most of the listeners by now already know what went down last week. So it actually started on Wednesday. I think that's just kind of when it was made public that, the Pentagon had put down their foot and said by Friday, by 5:01, Anthropic needed to sign this deal allowing, basically it was the Department of War. The Department of War had put out a deal and said, hey, we want to be able to use Claude, for whatever reasons. I think some of the other like things that weren't kind of like public is like this specifically was like for classified work, right? And at the time, Anthropic was the only company, specifically through their partnership with like Palantir, that was allowed to do classified work. And that's very important here. The other thing too was that Anthropic's position was basically they were down to do it. They already were, dispersed throughout the military, but they had two things that they were just like hard lines, specifically mass surveillance of Americans, and then also the use of Claude in fully autonomous weapons. And to give a definition of what like fully autonomous looks like, I'm sure the listeners are familiar with, companies like Anduril, or even have been paying attention to what's going on right now in Iran. You now know that like drones and things of that nature are being used in war. But most of those things are still human controlled. There's a human in the loop. And so when we say fully autonomous like weapons, not only is drones, this is also the use of like I would say like robot dogs. I don't know if people have seen like the military robot dogs that like China has like developed, but it's literally using the agentic capabilities of something like Claude to be able to fully navigate those different, military scenarios, things of that nature. But they are my good guy, as y'all know, Dario, stood the ground. Made me very happy. But I think he said a few things. There was an interview that came out on I want to say it was Saturday where he said a few things that I think people overlooked. And the most important piece of it wasn't that he was against the use of Claude specifically being used for like autonomous weapons. He was 100% against mass surveillance. But when it came to autonomous weapons, it was more of a timing issue. And it was specifically related to reliability. And I think that is very, very important. And we can kind of like unpack like why that is. But yeah, there's more details we can kind of unpack throughout the conversation, but that's kind of like the TLDR. As a result, some people are saying Anthropic's business is, at risk of potentially, going to zero just because the far reaching consequences of being labeled a supply chain risk. And the way the Department of War, I believe, labeled it was that any business that does business with the Department of War can no longer do business with Anthropic. And one of the things that Dario said in his interview, and Anthropic is actually taking it to the Supreme Court right now, is that is just limited to specifically government work. So say, for example, Anthropic, some of their largest investors are in business partners are Microsoft, Amazon, Google, like you name it, all the hyperscalers. Basically, the way that the Department of War worded it is that all those companies no longer could do business with Anthropic, where Anthropic is now arguing that they can no longer do business with Anthropic in relation to government specific work. So yeah, I think that's some important context, but let's get into this, man.
Was that the right call on Dario's behalf? I mean, I guess it's hard to say if it's the right call or not. It's the call he made in his position. From your position and perspective, do you think that was the right call?
I genuinely do think it was the right call, and it's for a few reasons. I think it was the right call. I think the first one is, yeah, coming back to the reliability issue. I think it's like when you zoom out, it's no different than the argument you've heard a lot of business leaders or even just companies in general talk about why it has been hard to deploy AI within the enterprise, which is because quote unquote hallucinations, things of that nature. Now, are these models getting better at quote unquote hallucinating less? But once again, they're dealing with classified work in high stake environments, right? And I saw this analogy where someone equated it to, say, for example, Boeing, Gotham, any of these other type of vendors that specifically work with NASA. And let's say there was a part or a piece of technology that was needed for a rocket. If that part had any defects, do you think NASA would include it in the rocket to allow that rocket then to go to space? It's a rhetorical question. Absolutely not, because it's unreliable in a high stakes environment. And I think, yeah, like when looking at it through that type of lens, I understand like why Dario like stood on that, because once again, he's not saying that like in the future when reliability is at 95 or what percent, that he's not going to say yes to this. He's just saying right now they can't. And so yeah, I'm on that side. I would say the second piece of it too is, once again, context matters. We didn't know that we were about to be going to war at 5 a.m. on a freaking Saturday, right? And so I think I dropped this in the group chat. Where I stand is from the point of view of like before we knew we were going to war, absolutely not. Like he's in his right as an entrepreneur, as a business owner of a private company, to say how he wants his technology to be used. And the famous principle that a lot of folks on the right like to use is laissez-faire, which is a fancy way of saying government is not involved in the dealings of business. Now all of a sudden they want to be in the dealings of business. as I said before, if this context of like, oh, no, we're going to war with Iran tomorrow, I think my response would have been different, because the reality is, yes, Chat GPT, OpenAI has like before, this recent contract, they had a contract with, the government. Grok did to Google, whatever. But the reality is that was for unclassified work. And there were multiple accounts of generals, etc., coming out and saying publicly that Claude is really the only thing that these government agencies are using when it comes to making like very high stake decisions. And once again, it could be because it's the only one that has access to that type of level of data. But I think that speaks to the value that the product like delivered to the government, and the fact that they said that they're going to phase it out over 6 months, when we know that these are API calls and you can switch out an API very fast. And the other thing too is the same, just as quick, like think about this. OpenAI jumped into the conversation Wednesday after, they basically said no or whatever, and had a contract done by the end of Friday. So they went from being unclassified to classified in the span of 3 days. If you go look it up, that process usually takes anywhere between 12 to 18 months. So they accelerated it for them, right? And so yeah, like when I look at like what he did, I think in a time where a lot of people are not standing on principle, he stuck to his principles, and I think that's showing. I think that's going to continue to show up in the business results. I mean, their app downloads are already going crazy. I mean, a ton of people have come out and like support. Obviously, there are people that like are arguing against it, and we can kind of get into that too. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm in the corner of Dario, like if I'm going to be honest. And I think we need more leaders at this time to stand up and do what he's doing. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Do you think that Claude, or do you think that Dario and Anthropic are benefiting off the fact that people do not know that he was okay with Claude and the models being used to kill people, just not right now? Do you think that Anthropic is benefiting off of that not being clear?
No, I mean, there's probably a certain portion, there's probably a certain portion of people that have not seen that interview, so they're not even aware of that perspective that he shared. So, yes, they're benefiting.
Wouldn't it have to be a large? Wouldn't it probably be the majority of people? Because the interview is the deep dive, and we already saw that Claude went up to #1 on the App Store, surpassing ChatGPT, which suggests that there's a lot of consumer
Yeah,
demand that came after that move, and so it reached circles. It reached different circles beyond just the tech circle, beyond just the enthusiasts and the early adopters. So to me, from what I'm seeing, is that, and I'm not saying that they need to come out and clear it up to stop the downloads, but I just think that that is very interesting to me, that there are a lot of people that seem to believe, as you mentioned, that Dario actually is not okay for using AI to kill people. And
yeah,
that is making people look at Claude like, oh, this is the friendly, Anthropic is friendly, they would never kill anybody, et cetera. But that's not true. He's just saying, we just don't think we can do it reliably. And I think that is something that they're benefiting off of. I think a lot of people care about mass surveillance, but not that much. There has been multiple heroes with mass surveillance, Edward Snowden, et cetera. And that topic has come up a lot. And from what I can see, at least my read is that people care about. But anyways, moving past that, whether or not Dargo made the right choice, I don't think he did. I think that OpenAI proposed a better solution. One, they were able to add those very similar um, contractual limitations to which Sam admitted that he came in and didn't do the best. So then they later amended the contract to add in, blocking domestic surveillance without new agreements through the NSA. So he came in kind of quick, kind of opportunistically. He admitted to doing that. He admitted to it being sloppy. This is not in defense of Sam. This is literally just saying this is what he said. I think that Dario wasn't the best deal maker in this scenario, because when I looked at the technical details of what OpenAI was saying, they were saying that they did not feel confident that who they would contract the software to that they can trust them. And this is something that I was talking about in our group chat, which is what I was saying is that if you really care about this, you need to design the architecture and the software in such a way that somebody can't abuse it in the way you don't want it to be abused. Don't give somebody a gun with no safety lock and then tell them, don't use it in all these different scenarios. They'll use it however they want to use it. 'Cause once you give them the gun, they can use it in any way at any time. So I think that Dario wasn't as proactive. I think that he wanted a deal, and I think his strategy to get what he wanted from the government was to use the public and pressure the government to fold to his demand. And I think that that was a failed strategy, and they cut that down, shot it down, and not only did they walk away from the table, they slapped him back to let him know you can't do that to us. And then additionally, gave OpenAI the same terms that they were asking for. So it's really one of those things where they kind of are saving a little bit of face from a consumer angle because they seem like these great guys, these moral guys, etc. In my opinion, if he truly wasn't trying to kill people with AI, then I would say that. But he said he's fine with that, long as it's more reliable. So to me, that's critical. That's very critical. 'Cause I think he's getting credit for being the guy who doesn't want to use AI for war. And that is why you see people coming out in support, especially on the regular consumer level outside of tech. You have these celebrities posting about it, et cetera, the celebrities that are against war and this and that. They're not thinking that, oh, it's really about, no, it's not that, these can't be used for war. It's just that we don't think they're accurate enough. You see what I'm saying? And so it becomes this whole virtue signaling type of, performative thing. And I just don't buy that.
I want to add two things, right? Because I think you're right on two things. First thing that you're right on is I do think it came down to trust. Not only in terms of trust between like people. So, Dario
Yeah.
and the DLW, whatever. But I think it's trust in the law versus trust in tech. And I think the other thing that you got right as well was the basically technical safeguards versus trying to like push them just through legal language. Because I was reading up on OpenAI. Yes, they got basically the same identical contract, but what OpenAI did was, and the DOW agreed to it, was they said they're going to build in technical safeguards to prevent
Yes.
that. So you can still use the tech as much as you want to, but because we have these technical safeguards, like our architecture is going to prevent the things that like we're saying you're not going to do. And I do think that is very interesting because I think, Dario, and we can probably unpack that a little bit because I haven't really thought about it much. But yeah, Dario was trying to hold the DOW legally
Yes.
responsible,
Exactly.
where that's not the case with like OpenAI, despite the contracts kind of like being the same. So yeah, I think you nailed those two things.
Yeah. And then another thing that I think about is over the weekend I went to go see a movie and I saw this ad during the Super Bowl, but I saw the Claude ad where it's basically accusing ChatGPT of changing the answers and whatnot. And when I see stuff like that, sometimes it's giving me the impression that they are focusing more on the perception of their company as opposed to the mechanics of their company. Don't get me wrong, Claude is a great product. I've always said that. But it just seems that Dario is so much more focused on, okay, let's paint OpenAI as the villain. Let's paint them a certain way. And then so that we can ultimately win the consumer battle. Because I think he's not happy with just being dominant in enterprise. I think he wants what OpenAI has, which is dominance on the consumer level. And I think he's part of what he's doing, and it's working a little bit, where he's shifting the narrative to sway people to say, hey, how do you leave your chat GPT? How do you switch over your information over here? Because you are more moral. You are a better person. Basically, it's like, if you're a good person, use Claude. If you're like, it's turning into this type of, I'm seeing that type of shift and he's benefiting off of that. And I just think that that's not, I don't think that's the right way to go about winning this this AI war. Actually, I don't think it will work in the end. I think it's a distraction. I think the most important thing is to focus on continuing to make great products, make the best model, and stop trying to appear like the heroes in this war. I keep saying it. I'm gonna say it again, and that's my piece on that. Yeah.
But
So
go ahead.
I read the article. I read the memo or blog post that Anthropic posted about this decision, and I'm pretty sure from what I recall, they mentioned that one of the reasons why they didn't want they didn't want this used for autonomous weapons was because of the reliability. So I didn't get the sense from just reading the memo, but obviously I don't expect everybody to read the memo.
You're
Most people
right.
probably didn't see the memo at all. But I didn't get the perception that it was a deception layer kind of happening there where they were trying to make it something out one thing publicly but another thing differently. I felt that they were as transparent like what Brylan said in terms of like the CEO coming out speaking that interview saying how he felt on it, which is like, yeah, we don't mind this being used on autonomous weapons, but it's just not there yet, which I think is a fair argument to make. I think more importantly for me, the thing that I kind of was like, oh, this is kind of interesting is the idea that, I mean, it sounds crazy to say out loud, but the idea that private companies can essentially say no to the government
Yeah.
for what they want. I respect that, right? I'm an entrepreneur as well. I own businesses as well, so I respect the right and the ability to control, who you want to sell to. I think on the flip side of that, though, that does make me extremely concerned that because the government doesn't actually produce anything, the position that they could be placed in if companies decide they don't want to sell to them or sell certain things to them. And of course, there's certain laws that the government has to force it. But I do think it says something when you have private companies that are saying no to the U.S. government. And Brylan, to your point, even about the war, I mean, even if we didn't know we were going to war with Iran on this past weekend, we're in a war environment. And so I think even telling the government no to how they want to use this technology in a wartime environment seems a bit concerning to me because the government wouldn't be asking for it if they didn't want to use it. They have a reason. Even if we don't understand the reason, even if we don't know the reason, now maybe we are due an explanation. Maybe after this all settles, you know what I'm saying? That's usually what happens. After all the reports and all of that stuff come out, maybe the citizens are due an explanation. But I don't think we can reasonably ask our government to explain everything in a wartime setting. And we know that we're in that moment when our government goes over to Venezuela and kidnaps the president. I mean, what else does that tell you? When there's military assets moving to the Middle East, I mean, it's just everything around the environment tells us what time we're in. So again, I find it just really interesting that we're in this wartime moment and companies can just say no. But hey, good thing we live in America where we live in an open free market society where the next best man can be right there to take advantage of an opportunity that one passes up. And that's exactly what OpenAI did. So we'll see how that pans out. But again, I respect the decision to do it. I think it was the wrong call. I think they should be working with the government on these issues because these technologies are important. And what we don't want to do is lose the next war due to ideology, like actual war principles. Because I think what happens is a lot of time business executives try to apply business logic to war logic, and those two ideologies don't necessarily mix well, right? Some things stand firm in principle in business, but in war, when it comes down to survival, it's a different set of principles that need to be applied. And so I think sometimes so in my opinion, I think business leaders should be trying to find a way to empathize with the military and try to work with them versus try to set these hard lines in the sands like what it looked like.
Right.
So
Empathize with the government. Empathize with the military. I felt as though he's positioned himself as this very empathetic person, and he's overlooking the fact that the most important thing is that we survive as a country. Like that's
right.
the most important thing. Like, though all this stuff that you're talking about, the average consumer does not fully understand the high stakes decision making that people in the military are making on a regular basis. So you trying to use them to pressure the government into forcing them into your ideas, and they don't even know you. These people don't even know you. Like you weren't elected. You're just some guy who made a technology and came out and know how to make profit and get investors. So who are you to come out here and like try to tell the government what exactly and it's the way that he did it too, in my opinion. I've seen other leaders go about similar things in other ways. You just see leaders go about it in different ways. And the thing is, he wanted to deal with the government. My thing is, if you're that principled, just walk away. If you're that principled, just walk away. He tried to pressure them into doing what he wanted it to be like. If he was that principled, he should have been like, you know what, that's what you guys want to use this for. That's not what I'm on. Let me just walk away from this deal. You
Is
know,
that so? So I have a question. The first question is, yeah, what would empathizing with the government, what would that have looked like?
it's understanding that Dario's not responsible for the safety of American citizens, but the military is. And the military has a wider geopolitical view on what's going on. To Dre's point, there's obvious signs that we're already in war. In fact, I think the most obvious sign that I have been pointing to is the fact that they've changed the Department of Defense to the Department of War. I don't think it can get any more obvious than that. We have always been, at least in the last few months, in a wartime type of mindset. That has been clear. It's like people need Trump to come online and say WAR, period. It's like, come on. But you know what? I don't expect Dario to know that type of stuff. And I'm happy that it went the way that it did, because the things that he was standing on still are going to, OpenAI is going to make sure that they can do those things too. They're not going to get the credit though for it. I don't think they're going to get the public credit for it. I think Sam has taken a hit perception wise, and they're not going to get the credit for ultimately still getting the same deal.
Yeah. So a few things. Yeah. I don't know. Do we really think that like he didn't try to understand those things? Like he didn't understand the severity and the consequences of this,
couldn't
like the
have.
current environment? Then?
No, I think he made it about terms of service. That's not being understanding to me. I think he kind of made it about terms of service and how he felt the product was being, where he felt the product was and how he felt the product should be used. That's, to me, that's kind of like the angle that I saw that he kind of took.
Riley, he's making a gun. He's making a gun and telling people how to use it. Don't make the gun. Don't make the gun. If you don't want to be making these super dangerous things that's going to mess up society, he's out there running around telling everybody society's about to mess up. Everybody doesn't know the tsunami that's coming. Everybody doesn't know what's about to happen. Yet he's still building it. Stop building this shit. If you don't want to fuck people over, if you don't want to do that, then don't be the gun maker. Don't be the gun maker. Don't be the one that makes the guns. There are a million of different industries. He chose to take his genius and apply it to AI. He could apply it to anything. He chose to apply it to AI. And I think he is trying to control something that you are not going to be able to control. It's like making the computer and trying to be like, okay, let's lock it down. Let's lock down the computer. You can't lock it down. There's some things that people are going to do messed up things on computers. They're going to do messed up things with all these different tools. I'm not saying don't try at all. I'm just saying his focus to me seems like a distraction. And it seems like for brownie points, he wants to be the hero, in my opinion. He wants to be the hero, and he lost a deal. And not only that, now he's fighting with the Supreme Court, and it's just a big distraction to me. It does not seem worth it. It does not seem worth it.
Yeah. I would actually a few things, because it's crazy that like history repeats itself, right? Because I feel like they took a play out of Google's playbook, and it looks like it hasn't worked, but I do think it could work. And what I'm referring to is, yeah, so in 2018, actually it started in 2017, Google had a project called Project Maven, where they were working with the Department of Defense, and they were using AI specifically for, things like autonomous drones, and satellite weapons and things of that nature. That eventually went public, and as a result of that, Google employees and other folks across the tech industry ended up signing whatever you want to call those letters are, those letters opposing it. And then, as a result, Sundar, very similar to Dario, decided that he wasn't going to do the contract with the Department of Defense and said that Google would never build warfare technology. And I think that is very important, because the fact that OpenAI was really the only one considered for this next, well, I think his name is Emil Mike, who's the CTO of the Department of War. He literally said, he called Sam Altman and was like, hey, I want you to do this deal. Google wasn't even considered, because once again, Google is in the same position that Anthropic is. But I think the very important thing is this is what led to the rise of Palantir, because when Google turned down that deal, Palantir ended up getting this contract, and now the rest is kind of like history. The business has basically kind of take off. So do we see a similar scenario for like OpenAI? Is that kind of what you're seeing? Like they kind of develop a monopoly within the government? I mean, I would argue that like I know these government contracts can get pretty large, especially once I think this one was valued at 200 million. And there was a comment from like the CFO of OpenAI where she was pushing back against some of the questions. She was like, "Oh, this is just a small piece of our revenue. Obviously, they can get to billions of dollars as they expand, and things of that nature." But yeah, do you eventually see OpenAI just kind of like dominating and being like the sole AI provider for like all government agencies, or how do y'all see that
No,
unfolding?
no, I can't see that being a possibility. That would be silly on the government's part. I mean, even Palantir, as big as they are, they're not the sole provider of anything. I would assume like the government has multiple contracts, multiple supply chain replacements. I mean, that's just the redundancy I think is needed to operate something as sophisticated as the U.S. government system is. So I just think based on that, it won't. But will they be huge benefactors of this, the switch? Absolutely. And while 200 million is nothing, I mean, it's nothing in terms of revenue. To your point, the opportunity in terms of unlocking billions is critical. But more importantly, too, I think you made a good distinction between the classification level. Right now that OpenAI is able to deal with classified information, then that opens them up to not only deal with the governments, but then go deal with other contractors, subcontractors, other companies that are also working with the government with uh, proprietary information, so restricted information. So I think it does open up a huge revenue opportunity, but 200 million is nothing in the short term. But the original question, no, I don't think the government will just completely default to OpenAI. If anything, they'll go ahead and lay the foundation to get other frontier model companies to create what they want, right? Whether it means seeing it at the university level, because we know the U.S. government and military is good at that. A lot of stuff happens at the
Hmm.
university level. That's the incubation lab right there, right? And then it comes into the military, then the private sector, right? It has this whole escalation plan. So they'll find a way to get the technology they want, starting with OpenAI. But I gotta run. Y'all guys should definitely keep recording. I gotta get to this family dinner. But yeah, I'm glad we was able to get this conversation going.
Yeah,
Well,
for
of course.
sure.
Yeah,
All
what
right,
are
y'all.
Have fun.
your thoughts, Ryan?
Let's see. Let's see. I don't think that OpenAI is going to be the sole provider of the government. I do agree with you though that taking the deal, I agree with you, Andre, which is that taking the deal is going to expand into a lot of other opportunities in the future. And then also that classification, as Dre just pointed out, allows them to be more competitive with other government deals or other things that may need that level of classification. This only reinforces that Dario didn't make the right move. I think what I struggle with is the fact that OpenAI was able to get it off with the same stipulations, although it took a little bit of extra amendments, shows me Sam is better at making deals. Sam is better at making deals. And this is something that actually has been talked about a lot. Sam is a really good deal maker. I don't know what exactly he says or what he does, or maybe he's good at reading the room or moving quickly on opportunities, that opportunistic thing that people talk about, but he's clearly good at making deals. And what I kind of see is he rushed in, told them what he needed to tell them to sign the deal, and then he heard what people were saying. He was like, "Oh yeah, y'all right about that. Let me add this on," and but he'll get that deal signed first. Once you, because he knows
Mm,
if he gets that yes, gets you to sign, boom, okay. Let me just add this. Let me just add because he's good at these. He's good. He's really good. And I think he's pulling too much on the moral angle. He's just pulling I'm not saying don't stand by your principles, and I'm not saying don't be ethical in what you stand for. But also, people are pointing out some contradictions. And that is why it is kind of hard to be consistent. Because, for example, to my understanding, they have a deal with Palantir. Anthropic
mhm.
does. And they do they do mass surveillance. Palantir does mass surveillance and they work with the government and they do a lot of that. Is he making sure that that deal with So does he not agree? So if you don't agree with mass surveillance, do you still work with companies that are doing that and providing that to the government? What does it take for you to be fully consistent in those principles? It's not that the principles are bad. What does it take for you to be fully consistent? And I'm not so sure he's plotted that all the way out. I think Sam has a closer touch on reality of the trickiness and the nuances of the things that are right and wrong. I think he has a lot more. He's just a little bit closer to the ground. I think Dario is a very smart individual. I think he's a genius. I think he's a genius scientist. He's came up with some of the most novel inventions, I guess, at OpenAI that led to even ChatGPT and the API, etc. But I think he leans a little bit too far in the clouds. I think his brain is he's just one of those smart, idealistic guys. And part of me thinks that might end up being something that he gets rewarded by from the public standpoint. And we all say we respect him standing on his principles, but then he ends up losing. That's how I see this playing out. He ends up not really winning the game because it's like, oh yeah, we respect him. But then he ends up not even being remembered because he doesn't win. And I think that might be an issue.
Yeah. Now you bring up some really good points about just Sam Altman in general, man. About like get the deal and then amend it, right? Like those are two kind of like different things, right? And I do feel like there was a master class in that. Even the fact that like, what was that, Friday or Saturday? I think Sam, he did that tweet thread where he went, line by line, kind of like through the
Yeah,
contract and was
yeah.
kind
I
of
think it was
doing
Saturday.
yeah, and was getting real time feedback. And then, what was that, yesterday? They announced that they were going to be making some amendments to it or
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think where I stand on this technology is that, at the end of the day, I do think AI at the model layer is going to become a commodity. The thing that is going to separate a lot of these companies will be their brand. And so when I see Anthropic and Dario taking these positions, being labeled as ideological or whatever, I think it's all because that is the reality the game is forcing them to play. Because no matter what upgrade or improvement they make to the model, most likely their competitor is doing the same thing. Especially thinking about, like, I don't know if you saw this today, but the head of reinforcement learning over at OpenAI left and went to Anthropic. So she taking everything that she just been doing over at OpenAI now to Anthropic, and like they're all jumping back and forth. So ideas are
I find
being
that to be
passed.
so weird. I find that to be so strange to me. Like it's like honestly, I think nobody knows what they're doing. They look a mess from the outside. From the
Hmm.
outside, like not being inside. Like, and I'm sure it feels so much heavier to them. It feels so much deeper to them. Like they come on Twitter and X and they write these long essays about how they're leaving this company to go to this company and this and that. Like I think it to them it's like they're making these full, huge, they're deciding the fate of the country. They're deciding the fate of the planet or something. And it's like, comes off a bit self-important. It comes off a bit like, AI is big right now, but like there's a few key players that will be remembered. Most of us don't care that you left. Most of us don't
Yeah.
care that you went here. Nobody's gonna remember this. And maybe you made the tweet because because they're so deep in it. So I don't blame them at all. But I just want to ground it though. Like nobody cares. Like nobody
Yeah.
cares. And it is interesting that you're saying they're going back and forth because then it actually ends up being that even things that are kind of supposed to be under NDA and be secret end up being carried through context,
Dude,
Yeah, through
we just got to
context.
be honest. We just got to be honest,
Yeah,
bro. Like,
yeah. Honest, like you can't like, yeah, I might be under NDA and I may not speak about something specifically that was done, but if I still have the knowledge, I can still, and they're clearly not signing non-competes, or if they are, the amount of money that the competitors are paying for each other is it's getting ridiculous actually. So I don't know if I think at some point actually they may actually start. This might be illegal, but I know like the auto companies ended up doing this at one point, where where talent was jumping back and forth and it was getting hot, and then they ended up saying, you know what, we cannot sustainably like have, and they ended up starting to work a little bit more together,
hmm
and they put things in place kind of in a kind of collusion way. I don't know if you can do that anymore
well,
because it's a little messy right now.
no, to your point on non-competes, this is very important. All these AI companies are located where? In California. And the reason why this is important is because in 2004, California rolled out a new law that made non-competes unlawful. And basically what the law says is non-competes are void no matter where and when they were signed. So even if a non-compete was signed prior to 2024, it is no longer respected. So legally, nothing
Wow. Okay.
nothing
California
is
is
protected.
so California is saying that it's just it's all fair. It's all fair, and
Correct.
it's all fair. You can hop back and forth 3 or 4 times if you want to. That
But
is crazy.
that's literally what you're seeing. You have people who would then go spend a year or something, at OpenAI, hop to Anthropic, do the same, then hop to Meta, and it's just this circular thing. And I do think it's very important. But to, what I was saying, I think this is why at the model layer, a lot of these things are going to commoditize, not only because of the talent and the context being shared, but also the ideas. And then also the fact that they're all training on the same benchmarks. We're grading ourselves on the same test. The test ain't different. And I think that's why brand matters, because the reality is the fact that Chat GPT and OpenAI has people saying chat. And when you go to the
Yeah.
street to
Yeah.
anybody on the street and say chat, and
Yeah. That's what I
that's
say.
brand. That's brand. That's
That's what I
brand.
say. Yeah.
That's brand. And so I think like Anthropic and Claude, they have been trying to figure out what that brand is. And I think Claude Code kind of gave them, like gave
It was a
gave
big
gave
win.
them a yeah, that was a huge win. But
Big
now
win.
I think they're trying to figure out what does that look like even across different functions in the enterprise and then to the consumer, right? And I think, safety.
Why do they limit people so much? I think that's a strategic mistake. One thing that
Yeah,
OpenAI is doing is that they're trying to give people as much AI as they can possibly consume, and they're trying to give it to you as fast as possible. I keep hearing, and even in my experience, people run into these limits with Claude. You'll be liking Claude, you'll be using it, and then you just run into a wall quicker. I feel like that's a
yeah.
strategic mistake. That's a big mistake.
Yeah, so this goes to another point we were discussing in our chat. Because I personally, after hearing this point, I do think that the long-term viability of these companies hinges on this. So for context, because I am a heavy Claude user, it's actually crazy. I was looking at how much I've spent on Claude. I am averaging anywhere between $800 to $1,000 being spent on Claude, like per month for like the last 3 months, bro. And a lot of it is due to me hitting those limits when I'm using like Claude Code or something. And then, they make you, pay a little bit more so you can, get extra or whatever. And guess what? I do it. I do it. And I think, there was a recent podcast where Dario spoke on the Dark Quest podcast. If nobody has went and listened to it, go listen to it. It's like a very insightful 2 hour podcast. But the point that he made was that the long-term viability in a world where capital is not infinite. Companies have to decide how do they allocate their money in terms of training a model and then also inference compute. Now, when it comes to training a model, we have to understand that is a one-time cost for that specific model. That's what that is. And then for inference compute, because that's essentially the usage of the model, that's where you make a bulk of like your margins. But high level, what you have to decide is how much do you want to innovate versus how much do you want your product to be adopted. And I think and I genuinely do think this has shown up. This has shown up in terms of how these the reason why Claude is starting to be perceived as like the top model is because a lot of their budget right now is going towards training models that have agentic capabilities. And in the podcast he talked about it. He said, I am risk averse, I am conservative in terms of data center build out, which
Yeah, he did say that.
without the data centers, people can't consume. And I think it's the opposite with OpenAI right now, where they probably have a lot less being allocated towards training these models. And I think that has shown over the years as the fact that now if you go to Kalshi and all that, the fact that Claude and Google Gemini has surpassed it, but what they haven't surpassed is adoption. And that's because they have built out those data centers. And so I think it's two different kinds of strategies that are being played out. And I think the key point of all this is going to come down to how do you manage finances, bro.
Is Dario playing it too safe though?
I think he has to, like going back to what you said earlier, that people really need to understand in the context of the United States today, the fact that the DOD went to the DOW and we're in this war environment, that eventually trickulates down to the economy. And we are seeing that in real time now in terms of how it's impacting oil, how it's impacting like the markets, although it's not much right now. Like, but you can play that out and it impacts everything, right?
Fair.
So the thing I really been paying attention to, because I think it potentially could be like the tipping point. Nobody is talking about private credit. Nobody is talking about private credit. And private credit is what is being used to fund a lot of this data center build out. And I don't know if you saw a few weeks ago, but there was a private credit firm called Blue Owl that essentially like halted everything. And so a lot of people in that space are saying that's going to trickle down. But like the reason why this is important is because if that dries up, I think they said that's like a $2 or $3 trillion industry, $2 or $3 trillion industry at the scale of OpenAI, at the scale of Anthropic, Google, whoever. You can't raise venture capital to fund that. And so I think he's playing for a world where you no longer can go raise that capital. How do you survive? And the thing about it is OpenAI, once again, we have to remember, legally, we don't know this, but publicly what has been shared is they are responsible over I think it's like the next 10 years, $2.4 trillion in debt.
Right. I just had this, that's all true. Those are just facts that, I guess there's a little bit of projection to the future that trying to hedge. And I take Dario as a responsible adult. He's he's seeing things. It's just, to me, this feeling that he's underestimating his leverage and he's trying to hedge his bets. But in that, I think in 10 years, he will look back and I think he will personally say he could have struck harder during this moment. I don't think he fully appreciates this particular moment. There are some people that fully understand the moment they're in, and we know for a fact that Sam does. Sam knows there will never be a time where he can get this much capital and this many deals, and he acts like it. Sam acts like this will never happen again. And Dario is kind of like, because this is happening, how do I make sure that in the future that he's just so concerned about everything. He's just so concerned about everything. He just comes off concerned about everything. He's concerned about the government. He's concerned about the society. He's concerned about, he sounds scared. He sounds scared and he's acting scared. And I think his decisions are coming through the framework of fear. And I think Sam is leaning into the future. Sam is being bold. He's leaning into the future and he's using this moment and not taking it for granted. And I think that he might actually get rewarded for that. I think his path is less clear than Dario's. I think Dario has laid out a much easier path for people to grasp. It's easy when he explains it. I'm like, okay, it's easy to grasp his plan, which may suggest he's not thinking big enough in his position. It could be. I could be wrong, but Sam is making certain moves. For example, and I know we're getting close to the end here, but because we're a little bit over an hour. But look, Sam just bought a huge office in Mountain View, right near Google, right near Meta, a huge campus that they're going to be building out. This is a guy who's trying to literally be like the top 5 tech company. He's trying to be that. He thinks he's going to be in the name of, he thinks he's building Facebook / Meta, Apple, Amazon, Netflix. He thinks he's going to be in Google. He thinks he's going to be in that category, the top 5. He's acting like it. And in fact, buying an office in Mountain View is going to make it so that people are going to be like, you know what? I can just go down the street and work at OpenAI. They're not going to feel like they got to go to San Francisco. It's not a huge commute, but it's enough to make people say, I'll just stay at Google and make a few $100,000. But if you can just go down the street and make $1 million, he might be able to pull talent from Meta, Google, and it can get real interesting. It can get real interesting. So I think he's thinking bigger than I think he's just thinking bigger, way bigger than Dario. Thinking big doesn't mean that you're gonna win. It doesn't mean that you're going to not have problems. But he's thinking big and he's actually executing. I think part of it could be that he started his first startup, what was that, 15, 20 years ago? So,
Yeah.
and then additionally was at YC and saw hundreds of startups go through. It's possible that his pattern recognition is higher than somebody like a Dario. It's possible. I don't know for sure. Dario might just be really, really smart when it comes to AI, but he may not fully understand what it means to be a founder. He may not fully understand the opportunity that's in front of him. He may not fully understand. You may not fully
Let me
understand.
let me actually say this, because the way I would actually frame this is very similar to what's happening on a geopolitical level when it comes to AI between the US and China. Sam Altman is moving like China, and I think
Yeah.
Dario has been moving like the US. And what I mean by that
Yeah, I
is
can see that. I can see that.
what I mean by that is, so China, just because the way that their government is kind of set up, invested heavily in building out their energy. Like right now, I think like, I don't know if you recently saw that chart that Shema, like,
Yeah.
put out. Yeah. When it comes to the energy, like, it is literally like night and day. Like, they have so much more energy than us as well. And then when it comes to data centers, we're pretty similar. But the reason why the data centers are very important is, while China, if they did have the model capabilities of the US, they quote unquote technically could be winning. The reality is only 20% of their data centers are being used, and the other 80% are dark, meaning they're not being used at all. And I think that's the opposite of what you're seeing in the US. And yes, the US is investing heavily, but the US has been smart about building out things in a way where if we build it, we know it's going to be used. And I think that the estimate has been, when you add a gigawatt of, data center capacity, it translates to like a few $billions. So real revenue for these companies. Once again, going back to the framing, I think that's how Dario is moving. He's moving like the US in terms of, if we're building it, we know we're going to make money. Where the risk for Sam is, you may end up overbuilding and having 80% of what you build not be used. So if 80% of what you use is not being built, once again, that is money that you're not making. And they're already losing, like, what? I think the last number was like $4 billion or $5 billion a year. And that was at the old scale. They're at a whole different scale. So it's probably 10 or so $billion a year or something. I think all of this is going to come back down to
Sam,
money.
Yes, it is. It is. So look, we're going to have to continue this conversation. But one thing I will say is this, though, because there's a lot to be said on this. There's so much to be said on this. We could probably go another hour, actually. Sam is going to tax people. The reason I think Dario's making a mistake is because he's putting limits too early in the game. He is charging you $800 a month when you're a power user. Imagine what you might use if you didn't have that $800 a month. If you were only paying $400 a month, you might be using, who knows, you could be using double, triple, who knows how much you might use if it was only $400, $200 a month. And here's the thing, the more you use, the deeper your dependency. And OpenAI understands that. The more that you use, the deeper your dependency. It's like Dario is like, he doesn't want, like, get people addicted. I hate to break it to y'all. If somebody's giving it to you for free and you fall into it and you keep using it, you depend on it for everything. It's free, it's cheap, etc. You are going to build up a dependency. So yes, you're going to get a benefit right now. But when that one day comes, and if Sam ever needs to get money, he's going to twist up that knob, and he's going to immediately start unlocking revenue. If he starts making those requests get tighter and tighter, revenue is going to shoot up. So the revenue, I would argue, the current revenue that you see right now is not even truly reflective of the revenue that will happen when he really starts to twist that knob and starts to act like Anthropic. I think Dario is just not being as aggressive. I think he's good, but why stop a power user from getting deeper and deeper into the dependence on the product? If you have a great product, let them use it. Let them keep using it. You're blocking people and saying, okay, stop using it. Stop. Like, I get it. He wants to see more money because he wants to feel more confident. But could we argue that might turn another way? I don't know the future. I'm just saying that could turn another way. That could turn another way. You're too. It could be that you're being a little too short term on trying to see profits. You could be too short term, so you're not allowing people to get deep enough. And I've seen people who have, who write papers, essays, dissertations, etc., homework assignments, etc., and they like Claude, but then they'll hit a wall. And then so they'll just go to ChatGPT, because the average person is not going to spend $800 or $400. They probably are not even willing to spend $100. But if you allow them to, like chat is allowing people, and not only are they allowing people to go further for less, they just came out. We don't got time. We're gonna end on this.
We got to unpack this next one.
The 5.2 instant model. So they're trying to give you AI fast and cheap, and let's be honest, that's a good strat. Let's be honest. Now you might be right. It's gonna cost them a ton of money. This is gonna much money, but at the same time, it is ushering forward AI progress and is pushing forward momentum on AI at a level, at a speed that is not, it's not normal. But yeah, we'll unpack it. The next part, we'll unpack this. We're obviously going to have a lot more to say in our private channels, but the instant, I'm telling you, that's like crack, bro. That's going to go like that, bro. Come on. The instant, bro. And they're saying they're getting rid of they're taking less of the guardrails off of it, so that it doesn't constantly try to tell you, oh, don't do this, or, be cautious about this. No, they say they're removing that, and they're giving you it almost real time. Like that's competitive. I don't know. That's competitive. That's competitive. And you're not gonna run into a wall. Come on, man. I don't know, man, but we'll get into it.
Bet. Well, shoot, man, this was a good episode, bro.
It's a good episode. We'll see you guys next week.